It was dark, and my heart beat heavy with the memory of my brother's eyes, those eyes filled with a strange coldness. It wasn't the look of someone I knew, not the brother who had laughed and dreamed by my side since we were children. In the shadows that night, I saw something twisted in his gaze. I'd never imagined my own flesh and blood could look at me with such distance. We had sworn an oath, the promise made under the brightest stars. We would always protect each other, no matter what. Growing up in our small village, my brother and I were inseparable. We made a vow one night under the stars, pledging loyalty to each other forever. We were young then, innocent and full of dreams. No matter what happens, I remember telling him, we'll always stand together. He had smiled, his face lit up by the firelight, and repeated the words back to me. It was our bond, stronger than any blood tie. We were brothers not just by birth but by choice. Our lives were simple but happy. We worked hard on the family farm, sharing every meal, every laughter. But as we grew older, a new restlessness settled into my brother. He spoke often of wealth, of finding a way to lift himself out of poverty. He wanted more than the land and the sweat of our fathers' fathers. At first, I thought nothing of it. But soon, his gaze turned sharper, lingering on the little we had with a hunger that unsettled me. One night, my brother came to me with a strange proposal. He had met a man, he said, who promised great wealth if we were willing to take a risk. It didn't sit right with me, and I told him so. The man that I warned sounded like trouble. But my brother's eyes shone with a new light, the thirst I didn't recognize. He brushed off my concern, saying I was too afraid to take a chance. In the days that followed, my brother grew distant. He spent less time on the farm and more time with strangers. Our oath and our bond seemed to mean little to him now. He was chasing something that felt like a storm brewing on the horizon. I tried to talk to him, to remind him of the promise we made, but he laughed it off. "You're too cautious," he said, his voice laced with impatience. I felt a gulf forming between us, one I couldn't bridge. I learned later that he had struck a deal behind my back. He had given his word, sold his loyalty, to a group of wealthy traders who promised him riches in exchange for a secret favor. When I confronted him, he brushed me off again, saying that he was doing it for both of us. But I could see the change in him, he was no longer my brother. He was a stranger, driven by greed, willing to risk everything we held dear. One evening, without a word of warning, he disappeared. He left the village, leaving me to manage the farm alone. Days passed without news, and the whispers began. People talked about the wealth he had sought, the promises he had made to strangers. I felt abandoned, betrayed by the one person I had trusted the most. And somewhere deep inside, anger began to replace the sorrow. I could not believe my own brother would leave me behind for the sake of gold. Weeks later, he came back, but he was not the same. He looked thinner and harder, his face shadowed by secrets he wouldn't share. The village greeted him with caution, and I stood, feeling both relief and resentment. I had waited, hoping he would explain, but his silence was sharper than any words. He returned richer, yes, but poorer in spirit. The brother I once knew was gone, replaced by someone cold, unreachable. My brother's new wealth didn't bring joy, it brought division. People avoided him, sensing the darkness in his newfound fortune. He tried to share his riches, to buy the trust he'd lost, but the villagers saw through it. I, too, could no longer ignore the bitter truth. Wealth had changed him, it taken my brother and replaced him with a man I didn't recognize. It was as if he'd sold his soul for gold. Finally, one night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I confronted him, demanding the truth. I wanted to know why he had abandoned me, why he had chosen strangers over his own blood. His answer was simple, cutting. "I did what I had to do," he said, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "Not everyone wants to live a simple life like you." His words felt like a knife to my heart. Our oath, our promise meant nothing to him. From that night on, things only got worse. Strange misfortunes began to follow him wherever he went. Livestock died, crops failed, and people began to whisper that his wealth was cursed. My brother shrugged it off, laughing at the village's fear. But I could see the toll it was taking on him. He couldn't sleep, haunted by nightmares he wouldn't share. It was as if the betrayal had summoned something dark, something that would not let him rest. One night, I woke to find him staring out into the darkness, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. "Do you hear them?" he whispered, as if to himself. The whispers? I strained my ears but heard nothing. His guilt, his broken promises, were catching up to him. The wealth he'd chased was turning into a prison, one he couldn't escape. And I, his brother, watched helpless as he spiraled deeper into his own nightmare. An elder from the village came to us one evening. She had heard of my brother's troubles and warned him to seek forgiveness to mend the bonds he had broken. "Riches born of betrayal will only bring sorrow," she said, her voice heavy with wisdom. My brother scoffed, brushing her off as he had done with me. But I felt a chill at her words, sensing the truth in them. I knew he was headed for ruin, but I was powerless to stop him. One night, my brother came to me, desperate. His wealth was slipping through his fingers, and then his nightmares were worsening. He asked for my help, but I couldn't bring myself to trust him again. He had broken our bond, cast me aside for his greed. I told him to find his own way, just as he had when he left me behind. The look on his face was one of despair, but it was too late. His choices had led him here. In a last attempt to hold on to his fortune, my brother made one more deal, one that would seal his fate. He sold the family land without telling me, the very land our ancestors had worked for generations. When I found out, I felt a rage I had never known. This was more than betrayal, it was an unforgivable act. My brother, my blood, had taken everything, leaving me with nothing but the ashes of our past. The morning after I learned he sold our land, I walked to the field that had once belonged to our family. The soil was cracked and dry, stripped of life and meaning. I could feel the weight of my ancestors' disappointment pressing down on me. This land held memories of our father teaching us to sow seeds, of long days working side by side. Now, it was nothing but dust. I wanted to believe there was a part of my brother left that still cared, but I couldn't find it. He had severed our last tie. As the days passed, my brother became a shadow in the village, a man without friends or allies. The elders shook their heads when he passed, and even the children whispered, avoiding him as though he carried a curse. He had riches, but he was alone. His gold couldn't buy back trust or repair the bonds he'd shattered. I thought about reaching out, but each time, the memory of his betrayal kept me silent. I had nothing left to give. One evening, he came to my door. His face was haggard, his eyes empty. Please, he begged, help me set things right. He spoke of nightmares, of voices that haunted him, calling him a traitor, a thief. I could see he was broken, lost in his own greed. Part of me wanted to help, but the other part remembered the pain he had caused. There's nothing left to fix, I told him. You burned it all. He left that night, shoulders slumped, a man defeated by his own choices. Not long after, my brother fell ill. His wealth was of no use to him now, it couldn't buy back his health or peace of mind. He grew weaker by the day, his skin pale, his voice barely a whisper. Some in the village said it was a curse, a punishment for his greed and betrayal. I visited him once, out of pity. He looked up at me, barely able to speak. Brother, he murmured, forgive me. But the words felt empty, hollow. I wanted to believe he was sincere, but the wounds were too deep. Our mother was heartbroken, watching her son wither away. She sat by his side, wiping his brow, whispering words of comfort. She pleaded with me to forgive him, to let go of the anger. But every time I looked at him, I saw the betrayal, the broken promise. She reminded me of our childhood, of the laughter we shared, but those memories felt distant, faded by the pain he'd caused. I couldn't bring myself to offer him the forgiveness he sought. One night, I dreamed of my father. He appeared before me, his face solemn, his eyes filled with sorrow. Do not let anger consume you, he said, his voice echoing in the dark. He is still your brother. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The dream lingered, filling me with a strange guilt. Perhaps, despite everything, I owed my brother something. But forgiveness felt impossible. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too fresh. I sought out the village elder, hoping she could help me find peace. She listened to my story, nodding in understanding. Anger is a fire, she said, and it will consume everything if you let it. She urged me to seek closure, to speak with my brother, to try and understand his choices. She reminded me that forgiveness was as much for myself as it was for him. Her words stayed with me, filling me with a sense of calm. Perhaps it was time to face my brother one last time. I visited my brother the next day, finding him frail, barely able to lift his head. He looked at me, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice filled with regret. I lost myself in my own greed. For the first time, I saw him as he once was, the brother who had laughed with me, shared dreams with me. I felt a weight lift from my heart, though the pain lingered. I reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of our shared blood. "I forgive you," I whispered, and in that moment, I meant it. My brother passed away that night. He left this world with a whisper of gratitude, a faint smile on his lips. I sat beside him, feeling a strange emptiness. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep sorrow. He was my brother, flawed and broken, but he had been a part of me. The betrayal would always remain, but so would the bond we had once shared. I buried him with my own hands, laying him to rest beneath the same stars under which we had made our oath. The days that followed were quiet. The village treated me with kindness, understanding the weight I carried. My mother grieved, but she found peace knowing her son had found redemption in his final moments. I felt both relief and sorrow, a strange mixture that left me feeling hollow. I had lost my brother, but I had also regained a part of myself. The anger no longer consumed me. I was free, but the cost had been high. A few weeks after his death, I learned that my brother had left the family land to me in his will. It was a final act of redemption, a way to mend the damage he had caused. I walked the fields, feeling the soil beneath my feet, remembering the hands that had tilled it before me. The land was mine again, but it felt different. I knew it was a gift, one I would honor in his memory. I poured myself into the farm, working the land with a renewed sense of purpose. The soil, once dry and lifeless, began to yield again, and the village came to help. They had forgiven my brother, and in doing so, they forgave me as well. Together, we rebuilt what he had nearly destroyed. The land became a symbol of resilience, a testament to the strength of community and the bonds that held us together. As the seasons passed, I shared my story with the younger generation, teaching them about the dangers of greed and betrayal. I told them about my brother, his ambition, and the consequences of broken promises. I hoped they would learn from his mistakes, understanding the value of loyalty, of family, and of trust. His story became a lesson, one that would be passed down for generations, a reminder of the price we pay for abandoning our values. In time, I found peace. The land flourished, the village prospered, and my heart healed. I no longer carried the weight of anger or grief. I had let go of the past, allowing myself to move forward. My brother's memory remained, but it no longer haunted me. He was a part of me, a part of my story, and I honored him by living a life of integrity, a life free of regret. One night, I stood beneath the same stars where my brother and I had once made our vow. I closed my eyes, feeling the presence of those who had come before me, those who had taught me the meaning of family and loyalty. I whispered a silent prayer, a promise to honor the land and the people I loved. I had lost much, but I had gained wisdom, peace, and the strength to carry on. As I looked up at the sky, I felt a sense of closure, a calm that filled my soul. The story of the blood brothers had ended, but its lessons would live on forever.